Media. It's something that a lot of people consume on a very frequent basis, but it's also something that's discussed a lot as well. Hell, it's the reason you clicked on this video and or why you're subscribed to my channel. But there are problems with media discourse and things that annoy me that I really want to go over in this video, whether it be for video games, movies, TV shows, etc. But today I will be mainly focused on storytelling media discourse, or that will be my primary example. But that doesn't mean the things said in this video can't be spread into all forms of media, so let's start with the first thing I want to discuss. Now, it's no secret that if you follow me that I make a good amount of response videos on this channel. One of the videos that got this account traction in the first place was a response video to someone who I'm now friends with. And my most viewed videos on the channel are mostly made up of response videos. And yes, I know it's because a lot of people like drama and are attracted to it, but yeah. But in my time making these response videos, I've gotten very similar comments under my videos. And the number one repeat comment under all my response videos is something I kind of want to get into. That being, you can't debunk an opinion, or it's just their opinion, why do you care? This kind of comment has always been incredibly stupid to me for multiple reasons. Firstly, because by doing one Google search and reading a simple definition, you would see that the definition of a debunk is to expose the falseness or hollowness of a myth, idea, or belief. Now, I know reading, listening, and having basic literacy is hard for a large number of people on social media, especially when you're saying something they don't agree with, but you can in fact expose the hollowness of someone's opinion and point out why it's a weird one to have. And something else that has happened in numerous response videos of mine that also falls under this definition is when someone makes a criticism of something, they will either just intentionally lie about what they're criticizing or unintentionally misrepresent something that they're criticizing. And both of these things, I think, fall under something that a lot of people seem to overlook when it comes to discussing media, and that's subjectivity versus objectivity. Let's take a look at some hypothetical examples to touch on this. If someone, for example, says, "I don't like Batman," that's a completely fine statement on its own. But if you question why that person doesn't like Batman and they say, because he's a human and can do stuff no normal human can do, so it's stupid, well, then we have an opinionated statement right there that someone can now go and expose the hollowness of. If I was to see this criticism, there's multiple things I would question. One being, well, do you think all human characters that do unrealistic things in fiction are bad? To judge whether they have an inconsistent standard or not. Because then by default, you've already exposed why their take on one character compared to another is hollow. Another thing I would ask is, why is it a problem that human characters in fiction can do things that real-world humans can't? A response you might get is, well, Batman's power scaling is inconsistent, therefore it breaks the logical consistency of the story. Now, this is a criticism that starts off with substance. Or sorry, it can lead into something with substance. So it starts to become less hollow. But what you can do from there is start having a discussion about whether or not Batman's feats actually are inconsistent in whatever story you're criticizing of the character. And at that point, you may be able to expose the falseness of the claim. And obviously, there are things that are extremely subjective in media, or just in general, whether it be the visual quality of a film, someone's favorite color or food, how good a character design is, things like that. But to circle us back to subjectivity versus objectivity, to put this in the most simple terms possible, the best way I can describe it is using this as an example. If I was to point out a plot hole or inconsistency with the rules of an established world, the way a character acts, or how powerful a character is, and nobody can come up with a good defense that debunks that criticism, then I would see this as a problem with the story that I'm criticizing. Do I think it's objectively a problem with the story that everyone has to take issue with? No, but that's kind of where I finish the point. Because what I would say is that if I point out these logical inconsistencies within a story and nobody can debunk it, then that is objectively a logical inconsistency within the story. But whether or not you see it as a problem in the story, that's where the subjective part of the media consumption comes in. People are going to have different standards for media. People are going to be impacted by a piece of media and take it more seriously than others and be impacted differently than others. But then that leads me to another problem within media discourse that I see, whether it be in my comments or just on social media in general. So let's start off by talking about standards. Now, like I said, people are going to have different standards for things, and that's fine to an extent. But I do think it's genuinely harmful to media being created when people have standards that are so low. Like on my Far From Home video, for example, I got a good amount of comments from people that consider things like a character being out of character or character assassinated, or numerous logical inconsistencies within something, or things that destroy the world building of a universe. I got a lot of comments under that video saying that a lot of my criticisms were nitpicks. So let me just simply actually break down what what a nitpick actually is. By definition, what a nitpick is described as is to find or point out minor faults in a fussy or pedantic way. Now, I think to put it simpler, it would be to simply criticize something that doesn't really matter much, something that doesn't really break the cause and effect of the events of the story, or something that doesn't do damage to a character. Now, what is cause and effect in storytelling? Well, this is something that I explained in one of my videos previously when talking about plot armor. So first we need to establish what is plot armor. Now, the dictionary definition of plot armor is used to refer to the phenomenon in fiction whereby the main character is allowed to survive dangerous situations because they are needed for the plot to continue. But this definition isn't very specific, and it can be applied to almost every piece of action media. Just because a character survives a dangerous situation or does something very impressive, that doesn't inherently make it plot armor. Because if a character has the abilities, powers, skill, willpower, etc., and those things are consistent or pre-established before the character is placed into a dangerous scenario, for them to make it out of said scenario in a logical manner, keyword logical, then that is not plot armor. But if, for example, me, was to fight Reverse Flash, a normal real-world human, and I was able to beat Reverse Flash in a fight, someone who is literally faster than the concept of speed and time, then there's no logical reason why I should win that fight because I have no reason to be winning that fight. And even if you were to give me a reason for winning that fight, like let's say the anti-Speed Force device or gold kryptonite from Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League, that reason could still be poorly written and still be illogical for reasons that I laid out in that video. The 16th thing is, we obviously know when they fight Superman, and I don't even think I need to explain this. Superman scales the Flash in speed, and it is stated by Batman, Superman is stated by Batman, to be the most powerful being in the Justice League, or on the planet. Even Barry is massively confused on how Brainiac can even capture Clark. I don't need to explain this. It's fucking Superman. And I don't give a steaming shit that he's affected by gold kryptonite, purple kryptonite, pink kryptonite, cryptocurrency. It doesn't fucking matter. He doesn't need to get close to any of them, even though he could literally speed blitz any of them and knock their heads off before they can even react. But he can easily throw a car at light speed, use his heat vision from range, use his freeze breath from range, throw 100 rocks at light speed. And in the beginning of the fight, he literally can do any of the things I just mentioned, and instead he flies off for no reason, then comes back instead of doing any of that. There's literally no reason they win this fight. It's bullshit. And one more thing I'd like to establish is that humans, or rather peak humans in fictional settings, that do things that aren't possible at all by real-world standards, that is not plot armor either. Fictional universes tend to have things like exaggerated physics, durability, or physical abilities for their characters when they're human, or even when they are not human. This is why you would look stupid for saying things like, well, Batman is human, so it's not logical for him to beat up a room of 15 men, or for him to be dodging bullets, especially if it's been consistent with the character for a long time, or if it's pre-established before a dangerous situation that Batman or any other character has these capabilities. And one more caveat that I would like to establish is in regards to pre-established well-known characters like Spider-Man, for example. If, for example, in Civil War, I see his spider sense activate and save him from getting hit by Bucky right here, without it really being established beforehand that he has this ability, I will not criticize the film for that because we all know that Peter has this ability throughout his history if you don't live under a rock, unless you're John Watts. So that is why I would not criticize Civil War for that ability not being pre-established. So now, let's explain why plot armor is bad. One of the most basic things a writer will learn is cause and effect. In order for you to keep your story logically coherent and for the audience to stay invested in your narrative, one of the things you need to have is good cause and effect. So, for example, when I used the me versus Reverse Flash fight earlier, if that was to happen in an actual story, it can cause a disconnect to the viewer of a piece of media. But when you write a scenario that makes sense within the confines and rules of either your characters or a world, and that scenario allows the plot to progress in a logical and believable fashion, then people are less likely to get disconnected from the piece of media that they are consuming. And this even goes further than just storytelling. It can even stretch into something like music as well. When an artist makes a song and their lyrics don't flow together well, and or they might be like offbeat,
it's something about the girl that just makes my head. then that can cause a disconnect between the song and the person listening to the song.
Now, what was said here is context dependent for some instances of things. So let me just provide an example of a nitpick in a story and something that's not a nitpick in a story. For the first example I will go to as a nitpick, I will use the infamous fridge scene from Marvel Spider-Man 2. Now, I would argue that even if a weakened Spider-Man is hit by an attack that leaves him under a fridge for an extra 9 seconds, that MJ should have died here. But what would this really change about the story? Well, nothing, because Venom would just revive MJ anyway and she would become a symbiote, and the fight between MJ and Peter would play out exactly the same. And even if you wanted to make the argument that Peter still shouldn't have been under the fridge either way, then again, nothing would really change about the story because MJ would still become a symbiote and Peter still wouldn't do shit against Venom to stop it. So literally nothing about the story would change here. Is this a nitpick of the story that's a valid criticism? Yes. But something I think a lot of people forget on both sides is, while nitpicks are still valid criticisms, they are not the end-all be-all of a character or story, and they should never be treated as such. Now, what's an example of something that's not a nitpick? Well, let's use my Spider-Man Far From Home video. In one instance of that video, I pointed out that it was stupid that S.H.I.E.L.D., the organization, doesn't have tinted windows for their cars. Now, this part of it is a nitpick, but what I also brought up in that scene is the fact that Peter takes off his mask while driving in a fishbowl, when anyone from the outside could see his face right there, right after he just drew attention to himself. This is not a nitpick, because if someone took a picture or video of Peter's face, then the story could change. And it also compromises Peter's character because he's revealing his identity in public, which is out of character for Peter. This damages the logical consistency of the plot and the character, and how the story plays out. But the even bigger things that I pointed out in that video is, again, multiple characters being character assassinated and or out of character at multiple points in the movie, numerous other logical inconsistencies within the story, and things that destroy the world building of the universe. These are not nitpicks, and if you cannot come up with a defense for that criticism, then I don't think you should be just acting as though it's not something that shouldn't be fixed. Because even if you're someone who doesn't take issue with these kinds of things when you're watching a movie, or anything for that matter, you should at least acknowledge when things break logical consistency, or damage a character's writing, or messes with the world building. It makes a narrative harder to follow and or be connected with, and you shouldn't parade things like this around as just okay just because it just doesn't personally bother you, because that doesn't help any creator improve their work at all in the future or even during the creative process. You can say whatever it doesn't bother you, but you should at least acknowledge it's an area of improvement that can be made. And when we parade around these things as good writing, it contributes to slop being created. And I'm not saying just because you have a story with consistent characters, a consistent plot, and or consistent world building, that it automatically makes something a good movie, because there are a lot of other factors like how good of the writing of the characters, are they shallow in one note, or are they three-dimensional characters that are actually like, you know, well written and interesting really, among other factors like the plot, pacing, visuals, and music. And now that I've laid out my problem with one side of the aisle, what about the other side of the aisle? The people who bash things that are very good and bash them for very poor reasons. And that circles us back to another big reason why I make response videos in the first place. It's to defend things that I think are genuinely well made from bad criticism that could directly impact how creators think people view their creation, and it may cause the creators to cause unnecessary change that never needed to be made. A good example I can think of is Insomniac's Spider-Man games. People criticize the first game as copaganda, or that cops are too involved with Spider-Man or in the world. And this directly impacted Spider-Man 2 because the cops are almost nowhere to be found in the open world, or really in the story in general, which makes the world kind of feel less alive now in that area. I don't know if enough people realize this, but you can bet your ass that creators look at stuff like YouTube videos and discourse surrounding their projects. So the discourse we surround a project with can be detrimental to the quality of it, and it can also do the opposite, which is why I think response videos are a good thing. It can really point out the stupidity of the logic surrounding a lot of discourse, and people's standards for things. But one final thing I want to talk about in this video is something I'll call brain rot culture. Now, what exactly is brain rot culture, you may ask? Well, I think it comes down to multiple things. 1, the people who just say woke, politics and my story bad. Most of these people who spew political brain rot as criticism are genuine fucking morons. You look at people like Synthetic Man, Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, Endymion, Melanie Mac, etc. You probably have seen people like this. These people who make their money from just grifting politics and media. And a lot of the time, they don't even explain why the politics are actually making the things they criticize bad. And when they try to, it's very often terrible. These motherfuckers will literally criticize shit at points just on the basis that there's something other than a white straight male protagonist. I mean, literally just look at Ghost of Tsushima 2. Most recent example, people are upset that, oh, Jin Sakai's not back, we're gonna be playing as a different protagonist, oh, it's gonna be bad. Granted, there are people who say, oh yeah, I just wanted to continue Jin Sakai's story, but there are also people who are just saying, no, it's a new protagonist, woman, bad, da-da-da-da-da.
Do I have to play as a girl?
I do not care! It has been 7 months since your last shower. Get off of the game, you stink!
When having a new protagonist, whether it be man, woman, fucking race, gender, I don't give a fuck what it is, doesn't make anything inherently bad. They could make a phenomenal story out of this game. They also get mad if like a woman in a game or movie doesn't look like prime beat your meat material.
Her jawbone has been completely shaved off, and she just looks bland. I know everyone focuses on her body, because she does have a widely appealing body type that basically any man with any testosterone left in their body would be attracted to. But her body also isn't very exaggerated. As you probably know, it was scanned off of a real woman, and so she just looks like a fit, skinny woman. Average size breasts, average size ass, though maybe above average for a Korean woman, let's be honest. I think the only reason people thought she had a big ass is because she has some of the worst pelvic tilt I have ever seen. Just look at a side profile of this character, you can never unsee this. And given the horrors that I've been exposed to on the internet since I was a teenager, this really just doesn't activate the neurons that much for me.
You might touch the finish line, but you've never touched a woman.
You're right. I haven't lost my virginity.
I'm tired of you stinking up the whole house!
Or if a project even remotely criticizes or makes fun of right-wing politics. And it's genuinely the most brain rot content and commentary. There are ways that politics can be poorly implemented into stories, and it can detract from stories making them worse. But when you're inherently calling shit bad or poorly criticizing stuff just because it has politics in it that you disagree with, or just because it has a minority group or a woman in it, you need to take a fucking shower. And the other side of this isn't any less showerless. I've seen people genuinely take points off a piece of media just off the basis that it portrays some cops in a positive light. People that genuinely thinks all cops are terrible people inherently. So therefore any media that portrays a cop as a good person is somehow bad now. And it's ironic that a lot of radical left-wing people throw around the word bigot to the point where that word literally has no meaning anymore, yet you literally see them using racism logic against cops here, on the basis that some cops are corrupt. So that means that all cops are bad now. You also have these people that will just say a piece of media is bad, or that you're a bad person just because you consumed and or enjoyed a piece of media if it was made by someone who might have done a bad thing. As if separating the art from the artist is somehow impossible to do. I don't care if Lil Uzi shot up a school, I'm gonna listen to every single one of his albums. And I know there's people that will look at this as fence sitting, quote unquote, but I don't give a fuck. That fence will be firmly planted up my ass because the radicals on both sides are the reason climate change is steadily rising. These people are destroying our atmosphere with their fucking smell. The second part of the brain rot crowd is people who think comic book media, or comedy movies for example, aren't real movies, quote unquote. Like this kind of media is just turn your brain off content inherently.
Going into Deadpool and Wolverine, I had a full understanding that this movie was going to be funny, action-packed, and bringing back OG characters that we know and love. At no point in time did I go into this movie thinking that I was going to see the greatest storyline that Marvel's ever created. Just because something's in the same category, for example, the superhero category, does not mean it's in the same genre. For example, these are both street movies based in the hood, but one is clearly a comedy, while the other one, you might cry watching this movie. And why someone would expect to see the most amazing story in a comedy, which never happens or rarely happens, I don't know why you would expect that.
Superhero fans, they are superhero fans, not exactly fans of stories. Superheroes are interesting because they're not just characters, they're icons. These people don't look at them and appreciate them just as good characters, they idolize them unironically. This has many effects, one of which being superhero fans primarily only consume superhero media, which is why people actually sat down and watched What If. But then, just imagine them saying the word pretentious. Take me, growing up and walking away from superhero fanboy syndrome, and I'm the asshole for not wanting to watch the most mediocre movie you've ever seen. Like, guys, am I the asshole for wanting to watch a film with an actual artistic vision? I think it's pretty pretentious to only watch cape shit and start throwing around the word greatness. You cucks.
I deliver a message. Shut it.
Most people with a functioning brain don't need this explained to them, but for those who don't have the luxury of a functioning brain, no, just because a story features a comic book character or shit in it, or comedy, that doesn't make the story inherently lose good writing as an option. It doesn't make it any less artful than another project. The Lego Batman movie is both a comic book movie and a comedy movie, and the movie has fantastic writing, which I already made a video on, which you should all watch. And just because some stories don't really have much comedy in them and have a more serious and or grounded tone throughout, that doesn't mean it's inherently better than a story with comedy and fantastical elements. Now, I'm not saying there's no element of truth in, like, you know, certain projects going for certain things. I'm not gonna watch a show like The Amazing World of Gumball and expect to and criticize it for not having the same level of writing as, like, fucking Whiplash. Now, stuff like this, I do give certain passes. The Harley Quinn show, for example. This show does not have good writing, at least for a good amount of it. But I watch this show because it makes me laugh. Rick and Morty, again, another good example, but I do think that show does have good writing in parts of it. But like episodic shows like this, that aren't trying to tell some grand story or a massive piece of a story, I do give passes to things like this because they excel at what they're going for. If it's trying to be a funny, comedic show, I'll give a pass to it. But like, to stay on Rick and Morty, one thing I loved about Rick and Morty, on top of the comedy, was they genuinely would have like interesting plot lines to follow at points, or just like wacky shit. I feel like when a show like that loses its kind of like touch, whether it be its comedy or like, you know, the wacky plot lines don't like, you know, start getting less interesting, then I would look at those shows and be like, it's falling off, or it's not very good. Just wanted to put that caveat in there. Anyways, the third part of brain rot culture, which stems into point 4 and 5, is something I'll call the popular opinion. When a lot of people like something and praise it as very good, it can be a bit discouraging to make a critique video of that thing, even if your points are well-founded and laid out. And this leads us to point 4. When someone makes a video and details or outlines their points with nuance, whether it be a critique of something or a response to someone else, and people leave comments just saying shit like, I'll take, bro. Just put the fries in the bag, bro. Bro is not cooking with this one, or nah, this thing is shit. Now, to be absolutely fair, not everyone is gonna want to break down your points and explain why they disagree. And sometimes these kind of nothing burger comments can be fine, if the points within the video have nothing to have an interesting discussion about. But at the same time, you look like a fucking moron. And when I make videos that are well thought out, and my points are elaborated on with substance, and I get these kinds of comments that are either just like, nope, it's bad, or I'll take, bro, I genuinely just think you're an idiot who probably doesn't even know why you disagree with me truly. You probably just dislike the thing I'm defending, or like the thing that I'm criticizing, and can't think of an actual rebuttal to the point. I don't respect these comments at all, and they aren't helpful to any kind of discussion. And sometimes I do get comments from people trying to respond to the points being made, and while I can at least respect it a bit more, sometimes people in my comments either say some really dumb shit to refute one of my points, like very obviously some dumb shit to anyone with a brain, or they just come up with some kind of coping mechanism in their head to walk around the criticism, or just walk around the shit that was actually said. This is also one of the reasons why I really hate arguing with people in comment sections, which is why we have Disagreement Day. But for prime examples of this, I have 1, 2, 3 videos and numerous examples on our Disagreement Day streams where this kind of shit happens, where people try to tiptoe around the criticism, and when they actually get into a call, it's much harder for them to tiptoe around the criticism. And hell, it doesn't even have to be criticisms that I've laid out on a project. It could be me praising something, or saying something is good, and someone either saying no, it's bad, or giving really stupid reasons why something is bad in my comments, and majority of the time, they either fold on Disagreement Day, or just never come to Disagreement Day, even though they know we do the shit. And again, I get people not wanting to come debate about something if they don't really care that much, but if you're gonna be a little snarky bitch in a comment section, why are you scared to have a discussion about the shit you're saying? And I try to be as respectful as possible to people who want to express a disagreement with an actual, like, discussion, but sometimes when I see some astronomically dumb shit, or when someone leaves a snarky ass comment, I start to stop caring about respect. And then finally, point number 5 within brain rot culture. Casual audiences who can't comprehend why people take things like video games, movies, and TV shows seriously when it comes to discussing them, or why people like me care so much about it. I often get comments, whether it be me praising something, defending something, or criticizing something, that says stuff along the lines of, it's not that deep. Or other things that I mentioned earlier, like, why do you care about someone else's opinion? Now, why is this part of brain rot culture, you may ask? Well, quite simply because it takes zero brain power to understand why people would care so much and are so invested in things that bring them a lot of enjoyment. When people say it's not that deep, it's often used as a deflection against what was said. There are things that aren't that deep, quote unquote. If you want to say someone who, like, killed someone over a minor altercation, or if someone lost $1 and they were losing their mind over it, or if someone says that they don't like a character's costume or writing just because it's not their personal taste and you lose your shit at that person just because, sure, in examples like that, yeah, it's not that deep. But again, if someone is actively calling shit bad or parading around bad shit as if it's good and shitting on you for criticizing that thing, and their reasoning for that is very poor and people start to parrot that shit, which goes back to the popular opinion thing, this can cause problems that I outlined earlier in the video about what media discourse can do to creatives. And with that said, that's about everything I need to say about my problems with media discourse nowadays. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would become a channel member or support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Channel members will get access to most of my videos early as well. I thank you all for watching, and yeah, let me know what you think.